Hi everyone, my name is Francisco. I'm the head of content at Doc, and I'm joined by Nick Lambert, CEO at Doc. Hi Nick, how are you?
I'm good, Francisco. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. So I wanted to interview you so that you can help me better understand the role and the importance that digital identity will have in the metaverse, how we will be able to prove things about ourselves in the metaverse, and who will be in control of all this data and the digital footprint that we create in this ecosystem. So can you give me a primer on what the metaverse is?
Yeah, I'll certainly do my best to. I think people have been trying to do primers on what the metaverse is for a couple of years now, and I think it's an ongoing question. So it's an ambiguous term. I guess it means kind of different things to different people. And it doesn't really refer to any one specific type of technology. It's probably representing more of a shift in how we interact with technology. So things that make up the metaverse can be technologies like VR, like virtual reality. And these are often obviously accessed via VR headsets and are characterized by persistent virtual worlds, meaning that a player can be online and then go off and do something else, go to the shops, go to school, but the game continues on. And so when they come back on, things have moved along. Also, AR is used as well, so augmented reality. Another type of technology can be typically used, and that would be things like smart glasses are often used, or even things like smartphones. So if you remember the crazy kind of phase of Pokemon Go a few years ago, where kind of children and people that probably were old enough that shouldn't have been playing were running about with their smartphones trying to capture Pokemon Go, and it was overlaying this virtual world of virtual characters over the real world, and even down to kind of technologies that maybe we wouldn't necessarily think as obviously the metaverse can be things like a heads-up display in a car, again overlaying virtual information like your speed, your direction you should be going in over the road. So all of these things can be considered. Even things like Fortnite could also be considered, metaverse as well. And these are obviously accessed via kind of PCs and game consoles as well. Again, because the spaces and the games that exist there are always ongoing. So hopefully that gives you a kind of rough idea as to what it might be.
What is the importance of digital identity that can go from our Twitter handle to our passport? So what is the role of, or how can we represent the different attributes that constitute our digital identity in this ever-growing virtual ecosystem?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think really when you're having an identity or identifier, it's really enabling you to access and authenticate onto the system, the event, the game, the metaverse, whatever it should be. And so that's really what that's buying is access to things. And also it's able to link attributes to that identity as well, potentially. So what is your status in a game? What type of assets do you have in a game? What type of armor do you have? And things like that can all be linked to your identity. The big thing a big talking point today is who controls this identity, which is going to be a real turning point for the metaverse. So do we go down the road of what we have today, which for the most part, large kind of companies issue us out identifiers, and they control how we access the games and interact with them. And they can obviously remove our access to these things at any time, whether we didn't pay a subscription or they get us confused with something else, or they fall out with us or something like that. So a big question that we have today is who should control this identity, particularly when we consider things, Francisco, like how much more intrusive like VR and AR and technologies like that are in like giving insights into our lives. At the moment, if you're gaming on a PC or something like that, you are giving away information, IP addresses, probably a spec of your machine. They'll be able to access your game catalog and stuff like that. But if you then imagine that instead of that data being stored about you, they're actually storing images of you walking around your house. When you put it in that context, it starts to take on a much more serious complexion. And so controlling access to the digital identity, or who's controlling that identity, is definitely a big ticket item in the metaverse.
Yeah, recently I was listening to that great podcast with Punk6529, and one example he gave about this intrusiveness is, for example, having AR glasses while you play with your kids inside your house.
Yep.
Hypothetically, the glasses will be capturing all this information. Where will this info go? And who will be using it and controlling it?
Perfect. And there's another example a few years ago when Google Glass was a thing, and people didn't like the fact that people were walking around the street with Google Glass on, literally recording everyone. And that would give you the ability to actually start using facial recognition to start basically tracking people through others. So it's, it's super intrusive, this technology, if certain kind of controls are not put in place. And one of those for us at Doc certainly would be like, you being able to control your own identity.
Yeah, and also another, as more and more of our personal data and important data becomes digital and stored in databases, there are more attack vectors on this data, right? Here in Portugal, where I live, in the past few months, there were so many very large companies being hacked. And it was like people woke up to the idea that hacks can happen. And so all these major corporations are putting all our data and even more of our data in the same silos and the same databases.
Exactly. And I think what we're advocating and what a lot of the Web3 space is advocating for is the individual controlling access to all of that information. So instead of that data, either your identity, some of your attributes, and some of the other information that's typically held by large corporations, instead that's held by you. And so, yes, still a problem if you get hacked, but there's no large kind of honeypot sitting there for hackers to target. It's really residing with you. And provided you can take control of your own personal security, using all the same, kind of usual good practice like password managers and making sure things are encrypted and, various other things that you're then controlling that information as well, which would make these kind of large hacks less and less, occurring less and less and having less of an impact when they do happen.
And how is it possible to change the situation where our data is stored in the centralized server from one company or one corporation to what you mentioned, every person being able to own and control and manage their data?
Yeah, so an individual could actually create, and there's technologies like Doc, of course, where we're working facilitates this, but there are many others as well, where you can, in effect, create your own identity. And then you can use that identity to attach attributes to it. These attributes can be things called verifiable credentials that basically make claims about you. And then you can use a wallet to store these things, and then also use that wallet to basically plug into experiences in the metaverse. And so you're kind of logging in, but you're giving that metaverse space access to your identity for the time that you're playing that game. And you can also be specific about what attributes they are able to access about you. And so then you're controlling that whole experience. Whereas today, like I said before, you're being given these identifiers by the platforms themselves who retain control over them. Okay,
so a verifiable credential is a piece of digital data that's under my control as the user, and I decide who I share it with and what parts of it I share. Exactly is that correct?
It is, yeah. So you can have and a bit of terminology here, but you can have something like zero knowledge proofs, which enable individuals to only reveal certain things about themselves. So trying to think of an example, you could have maybe a gaming profile, and it might show your gaming handle. It could show maybe your Steam account or something like that. There could be other kind of personally identifiable information within there. It could be the avatars that you possess, you know, what stage you're at with each of these games, for example. But when you then go to access a new space, then you could actually decide what parts of that information am I comfortable sharing? What do they need to know? Is it enough that I just share my gaming handle, and that maybe I have a Steam account? And if that's sufficient, then that would be all you share. And you can use technology like zero knowledge proofs to use within those types of systems. And that's something they've been working on quite a lot at Doc as well. So they would definitely give you some options.
Okay. And with the NFT boom, I've been seeing a lot of people, mainly on Twitter, talking about how NFTs could be used to represent our digital identity. And so a concrete example would be if I had a Bored Ape, that Bored Ape represents something about my identity, that, for example, I'm part of that community. And because I'm part of that community, I can use that NFT to access a specific Discord server. Do you think that NFTs could be a suitable solution for digital identity in this new phase of the internet?
I don't think they're a great fit. And I know that the other people are seeing them that way. And I'll tell you the reason why. So I don't think NFTs are a great use case for identity because fundamentally they are always on chain. So, you have the current owner of that identity, and if there's a previous owner, and that is always on chain. And also the fact of NFTs is they are designed to be transferable. And so I think having a transferable attribute with as something like an identity is like, where was that use case? Like that's a strange one. When would you ever want to transfer your identity onto someone? There are people that work on things like, and I've heard it kind of talked about or written about, where you get NFTs that are non-transferable, which is interesting, but you still have that problem with the whole thing being on chain all the time. Whereas things like decentralized identities or verifiable credentials is they don't need to be on chain. You can put them on chain if you want. Maybe you want to timestamp something, you can put a hash on chain. But ultimately, verifiable credentials are designed to be non-transferable and not necessarily leaving an audit trail. So I think they can be potentially a lot more kind of powerful. And typically also, Francisco, what you see is NFTs are good for claiming ownership of a specific asset, but just that one asset. But your identity, you can have multiple identities, but you might want to attach multiple claims or multiple things to that identity. So when you have a decentralized identity with multiple verifiable credentials added to it, that seems to be much more versatile. You can do a lot more with that. You can almost build up a kind of decentralized reputation, if you like, with all these different attributes linked to that identity. So whilst NFTs can be used and are being used for identity, I don't think it's necessarily the best technology.
I'm glad that you touched on the point of reputation, because I was reading an article by the New York Times where they are talking about what is Web3, and of course one of the use cases that is brought up is about being able to own your reputation and carry it with you. But that also brings the fear that was mentioned in that article, that if you have all your reputation on chain, and the blockchain is immutable, and a public blockchain is public, so all the information is accessible to everyone, that could create some sort of like Black Mirror-esque society where with a social scoring system.
Yeah, very, very much so. And that's why I think it's important that it doesn't need to be on chain. Like I think blockchains are useful in a lot of use cases, but just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should. And so we don't need to use blockchain for absolutely everything. And certainly there are many circumstances here where you wouldn't necessarily want to put your identity on chain for it to be visible by everyone and for that to be immutable as well.
Yeah, one example I see a lot mentioned is about, for example, putting academic diplomas or doing academic diplomas as NFTs. But would we really want that information to be publicly available and immutable to everyone?
Yeah, and do you want that diploma to be transferable?
Yeah.
So that's the other thing as well. But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
So what do you see as the future? What do you think will happen in the future when it comes to identity and the metaverse?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it'll be interesting to see how things play out. I think one of the big things that we'll see is probably what we continue to have today. So like Meta, formerly Facebook, they just have so much power. So they own so many parts of the infrastructure now, and they've obviously rebranded their entire company around the metaverse as well. So today they now own the kind of your access into these systems. The kind of VR headsets, obviously a massive thing for them, having bought Oculus a few years ago. But they also own potentially if you access that by like Facebook OAuth, then they can see not only they can see what you're accessing outside of that, which is a kind of word of warning for anyone using OAuth. Be aware that those platforms can see what else that you're doing. And also they control the spaces or the kind of where these events and games are held. So they have huge server farms that they personally own. So they're owning all of that infrastructure. And we shouldn't forget that the Facebook or the Meta revenue model is very much still heavily dependent or entirely dependent upon selling access to us, to advertisers, and they're duty bound legally under US law to drive shareholder value. So they have to keep pushing that, and that's going to be a big concern. So that type of stuff that we have today will continue. But I do think the picture is not all bleak. So with Web3 companies like Doc, and there are many other companies working in this decentralized identity space, there's going to be a lot of choice for users as to how they manage their identity. And the great thing is this is technology that we're probably a little bit more familiar with using, certainly within the Web3 space. So we're quite used to buying and managing NFTs. We're kind of having crypto wallets, non-custodial wallets. So we're used to owning these things ourselves and backing up private keys and things like that. So for a small percentage of us, we're comfortable with these tools, and these tools will exist for us. But I think the big thing is going to be how those tools become usable for the masses, because unless owning your own identity becomes as simple as using the one given to you by a large corporation, for the most part, people are not going to use it. Even if you imagine, Francisco, like if someone asked you to change the type of web browser you're using, you'd probably be quite reluctant, as to how you do it, because even as something as simple as that, everything's in a different place, and it slows your productivity down, and it's just kind of a pain in the ass. But that becomes magnified if you're then trying to grapple with this new technology, new terminology, and new sets of tools. So how much this technology gets into the mainstream is going to be very much dependent on how quickly companies in the Web3 space can make the user experience as simple as possible and make it match the kind of existing experiences that we're all used to.
And also, a lot of organizations are already exploring decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, right? We know several governments are exploring it. Also, higher education institutions.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's kind of European stuff going on as well. And IDAS is one where I think not yet, but probably in a couple of years. And I think that the UK are also looking to do stuff, and they're trying to produce a framework around identity where they will probably start to legally mandate that the companies accept digital identity as much as they are going to accept other forms of identity as well. So there's no doubt that this technology is going to start to become more pervasive through all of our online interactions. But like I say, the speed at which that happens is going to be very much dependent upon how quickly we can make that user experience painless and enjoyable for the user.
Thank you very much, Nick. I really enjoy this, and now I have a much better understanding about the role digital identity will play and what's at stake and the importance of it. Thank you very much.
No, my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Francisco. Have a good one.